Hello, my name is Mariah Eisenbraun, and I'm going to be doing a presentation over Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall was a man who strived for great measures in the courtroom and out of the courtroom. And he ended up changing how courtrooms were ran, not only in general, but as a black man during the Civil Rights Movement. Marshall's goal was to expand people's individual rights, but he specifically succeeded in creating new protections under law for America's women, children, prisoners, homeless, minorities, and immigrants. Marshall was born in Baltimore, Maryland on July 2nd, 1908, and during his teen years, he decided that he wanted to become a dentist because blacks didn't have the privilege of going into white offices, so they had to become doctors themselves in order to get the help that they needed. So he ended up attending Lincoln University, and even then he was really good about trying to get rights for blacks. So he and his friends would go to a movie theater close by to Lincoln University, and they would actually sit where the white section was, and they would sit for the entire movie. And they originally were supposed to sit in the balcony up where the black only section was. And believe it or not, they actually sat during the movie and nothing happened, and they would always walk out like normal people. And it wasn't until his senior year of college that he decided that he wanted to go to law school instead. So a path like his father. William Marshall was the first African American, and William Marshall was Thurgood's father. And going to the courtroom allowed him to understand how to debate and stuff like that. And his father would actually ask him questions, and within each question, Thurgood had to give him an answer and explain why he believed what he did. With his father already in the court system, he already had a leg up. He ended up applying to Howard University, and he got in with flying colors. He actually graduated the first in his class, and Marshall opened his very own law office and became the official lawyer for the Baltimore branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, also known as the NAACP. Marshall himself said he was taught to be a trial lawyer by riding in the backseat of Charles Houston's car. He would actually balance the typewriter in the backseat of the car and type out his evidence. He then became the coordinator of other lawyers' work. By the late 1940s, the Legal Defense Fund's legal briefs were highly collaborative works, incorporating ideas from many members of the fund staff and outside advisors. Marshall was quite good at getting people's attention with a special way of words. Many people said that there was no way that anyone had taught him to discuss things in his court cases and stuff like that. They said that it was just complete out of good talent. And in the Lyons versus Oklahoma case, it was able to display his talents as a trial lawyer. From the snippet of the case in the book, it shows how well his instincts were by presenting all aspects of the case. He showed it in a way that the reader wants to agree with the conclusions he wants the courtroom to draw out. Lyons versus Oklahoma. The case was about W.B. Lyons' constitutional rights. Marshall was the only one to actually bring up the stuff that I'm going to talk about during the case. And his brief begins with, late on the night of December 31st, 1939, Elmer Rogers, his wife and son were brutally murdered in their home near Fort Towson, Oklahoma. Marshall goes to say that prisoners from a nearby prison were actually arrested. a warden was assigned to go out to the exact prison camp, and after he visited, he actually reassigned all the officers and stuff like that. And a special investigator by the name of Vernon Cheatwood was sent out by the governor to Fort Towson after the men were arrested. And after his search, the 3 prisoners were actually released. W.D. Lyons was arrested in their place because he was actually there on the scene. He was with his friend. He saw a bunch of cop cars at his house. So he actually went over, and when he went over, he was arrested by 2 men that weren't even a part of the county police department, and they actually used their belts to tie his hands behind his back. And on the way there, he was beaten with literally everything they could find on the way there. And when he first got to the jail, he was actually struck in the face with 5-pound keys by the jailer. Then the rest of the time in the jail was complete horror for him. The very first investigation, he was kicked and knocked down to the ground, and he was continually kicked. Through all of this, Lyons professed that he was innocent. Afterwards, Lyons was beat for another 30 minutes after being taken to his cell. This continued the next day, and finally Lyons made his first confession. Just because he was scared, he didn't want the beatings to continue. The second time Lyons confessed, the same thing happened, only under a different location. A woman actually testified, and she said he had a black eye, bruised arms, and could barely walk. After Thurgood's brief, the Supreme Court actually wrote for the majority. Although the first confession does not count, the petition testified to nothing in the past that would indicate only reason for him to fear mistreatment there in order for Lyons to confess the second time. So unfortunately, Thurgood lost the case. Justice Murphy, though, believed that they had wronged Lyons and that there was no way for him to give a clear confession because of what they did to him. Even though the case was lost, Marshall had won simply because he was the only person that had the guts to actually present the real evidence to the Supreme Court. A case that Thurgood Marshall actually did win was Brown versus Board of Education, which is very popular. A lot of people know about it. And the reason that the whole case got started was because public schools were also segregated, and students were not happy with the faculty. They weren't happy with the conditions, their education system. So Thurgood Marshall, he wanted to step up, so he and his team created a brief so that he could end segregation in schools. Even though the brief contained and made clear that racial discrimination is unreasonable, how segregation harms African American school children, and does not argue the Plessy versus Ferguson. After the case went through, it was thought out to be unjust to separate children of the same age because it makes the other race feel inferior, finally ending segregation in public schools. Even though the 2 cases had 2 completely different outcomes, they both had a major impact in the United States in general. Thurgood Marshall ended up winning 29 of the 32 cases presented to the Supreme Court. Marshall actually died on January 24th, 1993, due to congestive heart failure at the age of 84. And these are my sources.